Hey guys, thanks so much for joining me today on this episode of Danamo BIM. Going to be talking about one of my favorite parts of Revit today, curtain walls. Curtain walls are essentially an assembly within Revit. They are a wall which hosts curtain wall panels. Those panels are segmented by curtain wall grids, and those grids also can host curtain wall mullions. Today we're going to talk about the basics of curtain walls, and over the next few episodes we'll talk increasingly about creating our own custom curtain wall panels, how we can use curtain walls in really unique ways, which is one of my favorite things. Today we're going to be in Revit 2022, and of course on my Dell Precision 5760 with 11th Gen Intel processor and NVIDIA RTX 3000. Super excited, so let's get started. Now here in Revit 2022, we are actually going to start a new project. I'm going to go ahead and use the Revit out-of-the-box Imperial Architectural Project. You can see that there are 3 curtain wall types. I'm going to go ahead and draw these curtain wall types, and in addition, once I draw those, I'll go ahead and we can look at these in 3D so that we can really see what's going on with these 3 different walls. Why are there 3 different curtain wall types and what are their functions? Well, you can see curtain wall 1 is simply just the wall and one big curtain panel. You can see there I am actually just clicking tab to cycle through the selection and then clicking to select the panel, because once again this curtain wall is really an assembly, as I mentioned. So to select those individual parts of the assembly, we're going to click tab. So you can see here curtain wall 1, the wall 20 by a length of 44, and the curtain panel is also a width and height of 20 by 44. It's using the glazed panel by default. You can see here that the curtain wall exterior glazing takes it a step further in the fact that it actually adds curtain wall grids as part of the type. So once again, hovering over the grid, if you do not see it selected, I'm just going to tab to select what I would like to select here. And you can see that it's actually pinned. And what that pin indicates to me is that if I look at the type properties, you can see that there are vertical and horizontal grids set by type. You can see in this specific scenario, they are a fixed distance of 6 and 12 feet. If we scroll down a little bit, you can see there are no mullions. So as I make this wall bigger or smaller, shorter, taller, what have you, you can see that I am going to increase or decrease the number of panels respectively. I can come in, I can maybe edit this. Maybe I want them to be 6 by 10 or 5 by 10, right? I can come in here and I can modify those dimensions, and you can see that it will automatically adjust. Now, in addition, I also get some instance properties for these grids. You can see here that I get a justification in terms of where that grid begins, at the start or end of where I drew that wall. So if I change it maybe to the end or center, you can see that it starts to edit the layout of where that grid is actually falling. We also have an angle as well as an offset that we can play with. Storefront takes it one step even further by assigning mullions to those grids. Interior types, which are essentially going to be those interior mullions, and then the border types, which fall on the exterior kind of edge of the actual wall itself, right? That's not a curtain wall grid, that's just the edge of the curtain wall, and those can be treated separately or uniquely as border types. You can also see that this specific curtain wall type also associates the panel as part of the type. So you can see if I select one of the panels here, tabbing to cycle through my selection, you can see that it is also pinned. So to modify what that panel is within the individual curtain wall grids, I would need to unpin it to manipulate that type. Additionally, if we select the curtain wall, once again, you'll see that Storefront has a maximum spacing for its vertical grid, which is wonderful in the scenario when we know that glazing, for example, will never exceed a dimension. If we go ahead and duplicate this, I'm just going to copy this over so that I have a unique wall and edit its type, duplicate it, just call it Storefront 2 is fine. Let's take a look at fixed number. Now, when I do that, you can see that spacing becomes grayed out and no longer an option. Now, in the instance properties, I can actually come in and tell it how many vertical grids to have. And what it will do is it will automatically equally divide those curtain wall panels based off of the number specified and, of course, the length of the wall. This is really wonderful when we want to have equal dimensioned panels of a fixed number. For example, fabric panels. We know that we're going to have 10 split across the entire length of the wall. Now, the dimensions of the panel, you can see I cannot edit. Those dimensions are automatically associated to the wall, first off, and then the grids that divide that panel. So depending on where those grid lines fall will automatically create the panel and its associated size. Now what we can do in addition, if I come in here, you can see that I can start to add or remove segments. So maybe in specific areas, I'm going to have one giant panel versus 2 unique panels. You can also see if I unpin this panel, because once again, the curtain wall panel type of glazed is set up within the type properties. So to change that, I will need to unpin the panel itself. When I do that, you can see that not only can I associate the element in here to be a wall type, which is quite wonderful, and we'll talk about how to use this a little bit later, but we can also start to switch it over to other things, such as doors. And to look at some additional doors and panels, we're going to go ahead and load some Autodesk families from the Insert tab. And within here, we can actually select the category of curtain wall panels. And we have empty, glazed, and solid. However, if we come back and we go to doors, you can actually see that there are doors that are associated to curtain walls. So essentially what this does is it takes that panel and replaces it with a door. It tags as a door, it schedules as a door, except it does not get hosted the way that a standard Revit door gets hosted, right? Typically, we need to draw a wall and place the door to create an opening within that wall. What we're going to do here is if I load this door, we're going to select the panel, and because I've unpinned it, I can go ahead and I can swap the panel over to that door type. And you can see here now that I have done that, if I go into my plan view, I now have a door within my plan. Now, just as with the case as our glazed panel, this is a curtain wall panel as well. So to edit the width and height, we would need to adjust the curtain wall grids. Unlike, once again, a standard Revit door where we actually come into the type properties and we tell it what size to be, with curtain wall doors and really any curtain wall panel, we're going to adjust the size by adjusting the mullions, or the curtain wall grids, which are hosting the mullions, right? So in this particular scenario, my Storefront 2 system, if I come in here and I tell my vertical grid to be a fixed number of 9, you can see that door grows, right, to a width of 4, right, from the previous width of 3.8. Now, with that, we can start to come in and we can start to add additional curtain grids, right? Maybe outside of the type itself. Maybe we have a grid that will break the rules. When I am placing a grid, I have the option up here at the top for placement. I can place it on all segments within the wall, one segment of the wall, or all except picked. So if I use the all except picked, I'm going to click and then click where I do not want the segment to be, and it will then take over that entire wall, omitting that secondary click. I'm going to go ahead and undo that secondary one here. Now with these types, for example, the top above the door here, maybe it's a transom of some kind, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch it to a different panel type. So if I search for panel, you can see we have empty panels as well as glazed and solid, essentially the panel types that we saw within the Autodesk library. So if I switch this over to solid, once again, after unpinning the panel, because by default the panels are glazed, we can come in and we can start to modify what this solid panel is, right? Probably want to rename it, call it metal. I can then change the offset, we'll talk about in a moment. In addition, we can also change the material. So maybe I want this to be aluminum. Let's see if I get lucky with a material called aluminum. I am awesome. So if I hit OK, you can see here that now I have a unique panel type within this wall. Change this over to realistic and you can see that no longer do I have a glazed panel above the door. I have a solid panel there. Those offset properties that we were referring to in terms of the panel itself and the type properties, we have an offset for both the solid as well as the glazed panel. There's an offset there. When I come into plan and I hover over the curtain wall, it has essentially this dot dash line. And that essentially reflects the origin of this wall, what everything is going to be offset from. Let's say that I would like the glazing to align to the face of the mullion. What I can do is I can update the offset so that that dimension is 3/4 greater. So I'm going to select the panel. Once again, this is a type property. This is going to change all my glazed panels everywhere. So if I did not want to do this, I would need to duplicate it, create a unique type. But I want to make this change, so I'm going to go ahead and update the offset to 2 inches. And there we go. We have our glazing that sits at the face of our mullion. Zoom out here, rotate, and we have a flush glazing and mullion system. By selecting the mullion, you can see here as well, it also has an offset. It is currently set to 0, meaning that the mullion will sit on the center of that wall location line. We also have a few additional parameters such as angle, widths, thicknesses, a profile if we want to use a unique profile. And of course, we can load in profiles. Take a look at some of the profiles we have from the Autodesk library by coming back into our Load Autodesk family under Insert, going down under Profiles. There's a section specific to curtain wall. Essentially, it's a profile that's going to sweep along our grid. So I'll go ahead and load in the profile for my curtain wall mullion so that we can associate it to the mullion type. Now I find that the easiest way to getting to all of those parts and pieces of the curtain wall assembly to create unique types and so forth are by going down to the families within the project browser. We have curtain panels. So if I wanted to, I could very easily start to duplicate these types. Maybe I want to create a fabric panel with a unique offset, thickness, material, etc. We can very easily do that. We can also go down to our mullion. I'll go ahead and duplicate one of my rectangular mullion types and call it center. I'll change the type properties here to look at the profile I just loaded in. So the rectangular center, hit OK. Now that I have created that mullion, I can now associate it to the curtain wall type of storefront too. So essentially, I've loaded in the profile. I've created a mullion that reflects that profile. And now I'm associating it to the curtain wall itself. Now, I probably want the glazing to sit inside of this mullion cap here. So if I run a quick dimension from the face of my glazing to the back side of that cap, you'll see that we need to change the offset to 1 3/4 inches. So I'll come into the type properties of that center mullion that I created, give it 1 3/4 offset, and you can see that now the glazing sits right inside that mullion. You could also change the dimension of the glazing so that it matches the dimension of that opening, being 1.5 inches, by selecting the panel itself, editing the type, and changing the thickness to 1.5 inches. Now, once again, the offset is actually from the center of the wall. So my guess is that I will need to change this to be reflective of that same dimension of the offset. And there we go. Now we have our mullion that houses the glazing. Earlier, we mentioned how we can replace a curtain wall panel with a wall type within Revit. One way that I like to use this application is by creating stacked walls through curtain walls, rather than using the Revit stacked wall function. You see here when I use the wall of stacked walls, essentially what it's doing is it's taking 2 or more walls and stacking them on top of each other. Unfortunately, this is incredibly hard to edit. What I like to do rather than this is place curtain wall 1 and start to segment it. So if I look at my 3D view over here of curtain wall 1, We can start to add some grids. Curtain wall grid. Maybe at 5 feet. Then I can start to modify the wall types so that maybe this is a retaining wall at the bottom, and sitting on top of it is some sort of exterior wall assembly, right? Like brick on metal stud. So maybe I will do a brick on CMU on the bottom, right? You can see how easy these walls are to swap in and out when using a curtain wall type. When I select the panel, we have a location line option. I can say to be the finished face of the exterior for both of these panels, which will align the finished face of the exterior. So that brick face is now flush. If I cut a section here within my plan of this curtain wall that I've created into a stacked wall, you can see that it's doing exactly that. It's taking this basic wall of the CMU and putting right on top of it my metal stud brick wall. Just like a stacked wall would, it's much easier to edit. Just like any other wall, when we go to place an element that is wall hosted, we can start to do that quite easily because this is in fact a wall. So definitely a unique way of how we can utilize curtain walls. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of Danamo BIM, the introduction of curtain walls. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell to get notifications for the next episode on creating custom curtain wall panels. Thanks again.